The transition was not a leap through space, but a violent tearing of the molecular fabric that held Alex Mercer together. In Manhattan, he had been the apex predator, a sentient viral hive mind that had turned the city into a playground of biomass and bone. But as the experimental containment unit at the heart of Gentech shattered under the weight of a dimensional tremor, Mercer found himself unmade. For a fraction of a second, the Blacklight virus was scattered across the void between worlds, a trillion disjointed cells screaming in the silence of the neither. Then, gravity returned with the force of a falling mountain. He didn't land, he impacted. Mercer slammed into a floor of cold, damp stone, his body a chaotic slurry of black and red tendrils that lashed out instinctively to find purchase. The air was thick, heavy with the suffocating scent of copper, rot, and something ancient, an ozone-rich tang of sorcery that set his viral nerves on fire. As he pulled himself together, the biomass knitting into the familiar shape of the hooded man in the leather jacket, Mercer realized he was no longer in New York. There were no skyscrapers here, no sirens, no screams of the infected. There was only the rhythmic thrum of something deep within the earth and the sound of bubbling vats. He stood up, his pale eyes scanning the gloom. He was in a subterranean cathedral of meat. Massive hooks hung from the ceiling, draped with half-formed torsos and elongated limbs that twitched with a life they shouldn't possess. To his left, a vat of glowing green fluid held a creature that looked like a woman, but her mouth was a jagged ruin of oversized teeth, a Tarkatan hybrid, though Mercer didn't yet have the name for it. This was the Flesh Pits, the dark heart of Shang Tsung's laboratory in Outworld, and Mercer's arrival had not gone unnoticed. "Intruder!" a voice hissed from the shadows. It wasn't human. It sounded like grinding stones and wet leather. From the darkness, 3 figures emerged. They were hulking, gray-skinned brutes wearing leather harnesses, their forearms equipped with long, serrated bone blades that retracted into their skin. These were the Flesh Pit Guards, elite Tarkatan enforcers, tasked with protecting the sorcerer's most delicate experiments. They didn't ask questions. They saw a man in strange clothing, standing amidst their master's work, and they saw meat. The lead Tarkatan roared, a sound of pure predatory hunger, and lunged. It moved with a speed that would have decapitated a normal man, its arm blades whistling through the stagnant air. Mercer didn't flinch. To his heightened senses, the creature was moving in slow motion. He felt the familiar surge of the Blacklight virus responding to his will. His right arm didn't just move, it transformed. In a spray of dark, shifting biomass, his hand widened, his fingers fused, and a massive, curved blade of hardened chitinous bone erupted from his forearm. The clatter of bone against bone echoed through the chamber as Mercer parried the Tarkatan's strike. The brute's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing its primitive face. It had never seen a human, if Mercer could still be called that, whose body responded with the same biological fluidity as the monstrosities in the vats. Mercer didn't give it time to process the anomaly. He stepped inside the guard's reach, his blade whistling in horizontal arc. The Tarkatan's head was severed with surgical precision, but Mercer wasn't finished. As the body began to fall, dozens of thin, needle-like tendrils erupted from his chest, piercing the guard's torso. This was the consumption, the core of Mercer's existence. He didn't just kill, he absorbed. In a sickeningly fast blur of motion, the Tarkatan's body was pulled into Mercer's mass, its flesh, bone, and very DNA being unmade and reintegrated into the Blacklight hive mind. A flood of memories and genetic information slammed into Mercer's consciousness. Outworld, Shao Kahn, the tournament, Shang Tsung, the Flesh Pits. He saw images of a realm built on conquest, a world where the strong lived and the weak were recycled into the Emperor's war machine. He felt the Tarkatan's innate predatory instincts, its knowledge of the lab's layout, and its deep-seated fear of the sorcerer who had created it. "Biological perfection," Mercer whispered, his voice vibrating with the echoes of the man he had just consumed. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, not with fear, but with the rush of new, potent DNA. This world, this Outworld, was a treasure trove of genetic potential. Every warrior here was a specimen of supernatural evolution. If he could consume them, he could become something more than a god of Manhattan. He could become the apex of the realms. The other two guards hesitated, their primal instinct screaming at them to flee. They had seen many horrors in the flesh pits, but they had never seen a man eat another warrior whole in the span of a heartbeat. They charged together, a desperate final gambit. Mercer's left arm shifted, his hand swelling into a massive, heavy hammer fist. He brought it down with the force of a falling wrecking ball, shattering the stone floor and sending a shockwave of kinetic energy that tossed the guards into the air. Before they could land, his arms shifted into long, whip-like tendrils tipped with razor-sharp hooks. He snatched them mid-air, pulling them toward his waiting maw. As the last of the guards was absorbed, Mercer felt a shift in the air. A bolt of green energy hissed past his head, splashing against a nearby vat and melting the glass. He turned to see a figure standing on a raised dais at the end of the hall. It was a man of regal bearing, clad in ornate silk robes of gold and emerald, his long white hair flowing behind him. His eyes burned with a cold, calculating intellect, and his hands were wreathed in shimmering soul fire. Shang Tsung looked down at the intruder, his lip curling in a mixture of fascination and disgust. He had felt the disturbance in the souls of his guards, or rather, the sudden and absolute disappearance of them. When a man died in Outworld, his soul usually lingered, ripe for the taking, but these guards left nothing, no spirit, no essence, just a void. "You are a curious thing," Shang Tsung said, his voice smooth as oil. "You have no soul to steal, yet you possess a hunger that rivals my own. Tell me, creature, what realm spat you out?" Mercer stood amidst the gore of the flesh pits, his blade arm dripping with dark ichor. He didn't answer. He simply looked at the sorcerer and saw the most complex genetic map he had ever encountered. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Finish him! Mercer's hood shadowed his face as he took a predatory step forward. "I don't care about realms," he said, his voice a chorus of the consumed. "I only care about what's inside you." Shang Tsung laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Many have sought my life, beast. Many have sought to master the flesh pits. You are merely the latest curiosity to be dissected." The sorcerer raised his hands, and the ground began to tremble as the failed experiments in the vats began to claw their way out, their eyes glowing with his green sorcery. "Let us see how your virus fares against the combined might of 1,000 stolen lives." Mercer didn't back down. He felt the Blacklight virus roaring for the challenge. In this world of magic and monsters, he wasn't just an invader, he was a plague, and the infection was about to begin. The clash of sorcery and biology was a cacophony of hissing steam and tearing sinew. Shang Tsung unleashed a barrage of flaming skulls, each one a compressed orb of tormented souls. Mercer met them not with a shield, but with a sudden, violent expansion of his biomass. He erupted into a shield form, his left arm hardening into a massive blackened plate of calcified tissue that hummed with kinetic density. The souls impacted the shield, but instead of shattering it, they washed over the viral surface like acid. Mercer felt a searing metaphysical pain, a sensation his nervous system wasn't designed to process. There was no DNA in a soul, nothing for the Blacklight virus to latch onto or replicate. It was pure destructive information, and it burned. Realizing that the sorcerer was a threat beyond simple physical confrontation, Mercer didn't stay to trade blows. He slammed his hammer fist into the ground, sending a jagged wave of earthen spikes erupting toward the dais. While Shang Tsung floated effortlessly back to avoid the impalement, Mercer launched himself upward. He didn't use the stairs. He ran straight up the vertical stone wall, his feet morphing into hooked talons that dug into the rock. With a final, explosive burst of strength, he punched through the ceiling of the flesh pits, shattering the reinforced masonry and emerging into the harsh purple light of the Outworld sky. He landed on a jagged ridge overlooking a vast, desolate expanse known as the Wastelands. Manhattan was a forest of steel and glass. This was a graveyard of empires. The horizon was jagged with the ruins of civilizations long ago merged into Shao Kahn's domain. The air was dry and carried the scent of sulfur and old blood. Mercer stood still for a moment, his viral senses recalibrating. In New York, the hum of millions of heartbeats had been a constant background noise, a buffet of endless biomass. Here, the silence was absolute, broken only by the whistling of the wind through bone-dry canyons. His stomach lurched, a phantom sensation, for Mercer had no organs, but the hunger was real. The consumption of the guards had provided a temporary surge, but the Blacklight virus was a furnace that required constant fuel to maintain its superhuman complexity. He needed more than just guards. He needed the architects of this realm's violence. He didn't have to wait long. A mile below him, a dust cloud was kicked up by a fast-moving war party. Through his telescopic viral vision, Mercer tracked them. They were mounted on reptilian beasts, creatures with 6 legs and scales that shimmered like oil. The riders were more of the blade-armed warriors he had seen in the pits, but these were leaner, faster, and draped in the crimson banners of the Tarkatan hordes. Leading them was a figure who stood a head taller than the rest, his arm blades nearly 3 feet long and glowing with a faint, malevolent light. This was Baraka, the general of the Tarkatans, leading a scouting party to ensure the perimeter of the pits remained secure. Mercer didn't descend like a man. He fell like a meteor. He tucked his body into a tight ball, his outer layer hardening into an armored shell. He struck the center of the Tarkatan line with the force of a mortar shell, the impact liquefying the nearest mounts and sending their riders flying in a spray of purple blood. As the dust settled, Mercer rose from the crater. His clothes were tattered, but the biomass beneath shifted and flowed, mending the fabric and his skin simultaneously. The Tarkatans circled him, their mounts hissing and snapping. Baraka dismounted, his yellow eyes fixed on the intruder with a mixture of predatory curiosity and insulted pride. "You smell of the pits," Baraka growled, his voice a jagged rasp. "You smell of the sorcerer's failures, but you move like a conqueror." Mercer's arms shifted, his hands elongating into the 3-fingered claws he favored for high-speed butchery. "I'm not a failure," Mercer replied, the voices of the guards he had consumed vibrating in his throat. "I'm the upgrade." Baraka roared, a sound that signaled the charge. The Tarkatan scouts closed in from all sides, their bone blades whistling. Mercer became a blur of black and red. He didn't just fight, he choreographed a slaughter. He parried a strike from the left, his claws shearing through the attacker's bone blade as if it were dry wood, then spun and drove his hand through the chest of another, lifting the warrior off the ground. Instead of throwing the body aside, Mercer initiated a combat consumption. While still parrying Baraka's subsequent strike with his other arm, tendrils erupted from his torso and pulled the dying Tarkaton into his mass. The transition was instantaneous. Mercer felt the Tarkaton's martial discipline, a brutal, efficient style of combat honed over centuries of tribal warfare, integrate into his own reflexes. He learned the blade spark, the art of scraping his arm blades together to create a projectile of kinetic friction. He learned the chop-chop, the blurring speed of a multi-strike flurries. Baraka watched his men disappear into the stranger, and his rage boiled over. He lunged with a blade spin, a whirlwind of steel and bone that forced even Mercer back. The general was faster than the guards, his movements dictated by a lifetime of leading the vanguard. He managed to catch Mercer across the ribs, his blade carving a deep furrow that should have spilled entrails.
Instead, the wound bled black smoke and writhing worms of biomass that immediately began to stitch the gap closed. Mercer looked down at the wound, then up at Baraka. A cold, predatory smile touched his lips. "Your DNA is resilient," Mercer observed. "Your bones are reinforced with high-density calcium deposits. Your muscle fibers are braided like steel cables." Mercer's entire form began to shift. He didn't just want to kill Baraka, he wanted to be the better version of him. His claws retracted, and from his forearms, two massive serrated blades erupted, not made of bone, but of a hyperdense viral chitin that mirrored Baraka's own weapons, only larger and sharper. He adopted the Tarkatan combat stance, his feet digging into the sand, his center of gravity low and lethal. The two predators clashed in the center of the wastelands, a storm of blades that sent sparks flying into the darkening sky. To any observer, it looked like two Tarkatan gods dueling for the soul of the realm. Mercer used Baraka's own techniques against him, but with the added advantage of his shifting anatomy. He would extend his blade mid-swing to catch Baraka off guard, or soften his torso to let a strike pass through him before re-solidifying to trap the general's arm. Baraka was being outfought by a mirror of himself. He kicked Baraka back and prepared for a final, desperate lunging impalement. But as he flew through the air, Mercer's form changed again. His feet fused into the ground, and his arms didn't swing. They exploded outward into a forest of ground spikes. Baraka was impaled midair, dozens of jagged, viral pillars erupting through his chest and limbs. He hung there, gasping, his yellow eyes wide with the realization of his own mortality. Mercer walked toward him, the sand crunching beneath his boots. He reached out and gripped Baraka's face, his fingers beginning to turn into the familiar hungry tendrils. "You were a general," Mercer whispered. "Your memories will tell me where the Emperor hides. Your strength will make me his end." As the last of Baraka was consumed, Mercer felt a massive surge of power. His armor form evolved, the plates now sporting the jagged, defensive spikes of the targeting elite. He stood alone in the wastelands, the winds howling around him. He now knew of the portal to Earthrealm. He knew of the invasion currently underway in the city of New York, his home. But more importantly, he knew that the Emperor, Shao Kahn, possessed a physical power that transcended anything Mercer had ever imagined. Before he could begin his trek toward the portal, the sky above him split. A bolt of blue lightning, thick as a tree trunk, slammed into the sand 10 feet away. The heat was so intense it turned the dunes to glass instantly. Mercer recoiled, his viral nature instinctively fearing the high-energy discharge. From the crater of molten glass, a figure rose. He was tall, draped in white and blue silks, his head topped with a conical straw hat that shaded eyes glowing with the raw power of the storm. Raiden, the god of thunder and protector of Earthrealm, looked at Mercer not with the curiosity of a sorcerer, but with the grim determination of a guardian who had found a cancer in his world. "You do not belong to any realm," Raiden's voice boomed, vibrating in Mercer's very marrow. "You are a void where life should be. I cannot allow your infection to spread." Mercer didn't flinch. He looked at the god of thunder and felt the Blacklight virus within him coil like a viper. "I've killed gods before," Mercer lied, his voice a jagged echo of Baraka's rasp. "You're just another specimen."
The air around Raiden didn't just vibrate, it ionized, turning the dry wasteland oxygen into a searing haze of blue-white arcs. Mercer felt his internal sensors scream. To the Blacklight virus, electricity was a chaotic disruption of the bioelectric signals that allowed Mercer to command his trillion-cell collective. If his brain, or the shifting approximation of one, was fried, the hive mind would fracture. He dropped into a low crouch, his armor form thickening, the blackened plates of viral chitin growing dense enough to absorb kinetic impact. But he knew that against a god of the storm, physical density was a poor substitute for grounding. Raiden didn't wait for a formal challenge. He moved with the speed of a thought, a streak of light that bypassed the physical distance between them in a heartbeat. He slammed a palm into Mercer's chest, a massive discharge of vicinity blast energy erupting from his hand. The force sent Mercer hurtling backward, skipping across the glass shard dunes like a stone across a lake. Every arc of lightning that danced across his skin felt like 1,000 red-hot needles trying to unthread his DNA. "Your existence is an affront to the cycle of life," Raiden's voice echoed, seemingly coming from the thunderheads gathering above. "You consume the flesh and leave the soul to wither in the void. You are a hunger that cannot be sated, and I will see you unmade." Mercer flipped in midair, digging his claws into the ground to arrest his momentum. He stood up, smoke rising from the charred patches on his leather jacket. His biomass was already working, shedding the dead, blackened cells and replacing them with fresh, conductive-resistant tissue. He looked at Raiden and let out a rasping laugh, the voice of the Tarkatan General Baraka still vibrating in his throat. "You talk about cycles and souls as if they matter," Mercer said, his voice overlapping with the hundreds of others he had consumed. "I've seen your cycle in the flesh pits. I've seen what your gods allow. I'm not an affront, Raiden. I'm a solution. I'm the only thing in these realms that doesn't need a heaven or a hell to survive." Mercer launched his counterattack. He didn't run, he used a divergence dash, his body blurring into a cloud of red tendrils that reformed 10 feet closer to the Thunder God. He swung his whip fist, the long, serrated lash snapping through the air with supersonic speed. Raiden teleported in a flash of light, reappearing behind Mercer, but the virus was faster. Mercer's entire torso rotated 360 degrees, his arm extending into a massive blade that whistled inches from Raiden's crest.
The god of thunder parried the strike with his staff, the wood reinforced by divine energy. The collision created a shockwave that flattened the surrounding dunes. Raiden was visibly taken aback. He had fought demons, sorcerers, and even titans, but the sheer unpredictability of Mercer's biology was a new variable. Most fighters followed a style, a rhythm. Mercer was a shifting mass of combat data, pulling moves from the Tarkatans he'd just eaten and blending them with the street-fighting brutality of a man who had survived a nuclear detonation. Raiden swung his staff in a wide arc, a shocker move that sent a wave of electricity through the ground. Mercer anticipated it. He jumped hundreds of feet into the air, his muscles coiling and exploding with the force of a hydraulic press. While in the air, he didn't just fall, he shifted into his cannonball form, tucking his armored body into a sphere of spiked biomass and hurtling toward Raiden like a falling star. Raiden braced himself, raising his hands to catch the impact with a barrier of pure lightning. The collision was blinding. For a moment, the wastelands were illuminated as if by a second sun. When the light faded, Mercer was on the ground, his arms shifted into massive hammer fists, pounding at Raiden's barrier. Each blow cracked the air like a whip. "You have no spirit," Raiden shouted, his eyes burning with white fire. He reached out and grabbed Mercer by the throat, the divine electricity surging directly into Mercer's core. "Even the most wicked sorcerer has a spark of the one being within them. You are hollow." The pain was beyond anything Mercer had experienced. He felt the Blacklight virus beginning to liquefy under the intense heat. His vision blurred, flickering between the memories of Alex Mercer in New York and the dying screams of the Tarkatan scouts. But in that agony, the virus did what it did best. It adapted. It analyzed the frequency of Raiden's divine energy. It looked at the way the lightning interacted with the cellular walls. Mercer didn't pull away. He leaned in. From his chest, hundreds of microtendrils erupted, not trying to consume Raiden. He couldn't absorb a god's essence yet, but trying to ground him. Mercer's feet shifted, extending deep into the bedrock of Outworld, turning his own body into a massive lightning rod.
The energy that Raiden was pumping into him was diverted through his frame and into the planet itself. The sand around Mercer's feet turned to molten slag instantly, but the pressure on his internal hive mind eased. "My hollow nature is my greatest strength," Mercer hissed. His hand shifted into a jagged claw that raked across Raiden's chest, drawing blood that glowed with blue ichor. "You can't kill what isn't truly alive."
Raiden pushed him back with a godly thunder palm strike, his expression shifting from righteous anger to a flicker of genuine concern. He realized that this creature was a biological sponge, capable of learning and negating even the most powerful elemental attacks through sheer evolutionary spite. If this creature reached Earthrealm, it wouldn't just join the war, it would consume the combatants on both sides until there was nothing left but a single pulsing mass of infected flesh. "The Elder Gods must be consulted," Raiden whispered, a phrase that usually preceded his tactical withdrawal. He raised his staff, the heavens opening up to receive him. "You are a plague upon reality, Mercer. I will return with the means to purge you." "Wait your turn, old man," Mercer snarled. He launched his whip fist upward, trying to snag Raiden's ankle before the god could dissipate. The serrated hook caught the hem of Raiden's cloak, but the Thunder God exploded into a million sparks, the force of the transition snapping the viral lash and sending Mercer tumbling back into the sand. The wastelands fell silent once more. Mercer stood up, his body smoking, his biomass slowly knitting back together. He felt different. The brief contact with Raiden's energy had burnt a new set of instructions into his genetic code. His cells were now more resilient to electrical discharge, and his senses had expanded. He could feel the dimensional thinning where the portals to Earthrealm were being held open by Shao Kahn's sorcerers. He looked toward the horizon, where a massive, swirling vortex of green and purple energy dominated the sky. That was the portal to Earthrealm. That was the way to New York. But Mercer didn't just want to go home. He realized that this Mortal Kombat was a tournament of the highest-tiered genetic material in existence. If he could reach the champions before they were killed or resurrected, he could integrate their powers. He thought of the soul Raiden was so obsessed with. If Mercer couldn't consume souls, he would simply consume the bodies that housed them so thoroughly that the soul would have nowhere to return to. He would become a living tomb for the heroes and villains of this universe. Mercer began to run. He didn't tire. His viral metabolism recycled his own waste into energy. He moved across the dunes at 60 miles per hour, a shadow in the Outworld twilight. He was no longer just an intruder. He was a third faction in a war of two. And as he neared the portal, he sensed a different kind of energy, modern, metallic, and cold. Earthrealm's military had arrived in Outworld to strike back, the Special Forces. Mercer recognized the scent of high-grade explosives and jet fuel. It smelled like Manhattan. It smelled like prey.
The transition from the scorched sands of the wastelands to the metallic, high-decibel chaos of a Special Forces forward operating base was jarring. Mercer felt the shift in his environment before he saw it. The air no longer tasted of ancient dust and sorcery. It carried the sharp chemical tang of JP-8 jet fuel, the ozone of high-frequency radios, and the unmistakable scent of human sweat and gun oil. He had reached the edge of the portal breach, a shimmering, unstable tear in reality, held open by Shao Kahn's mages, but contested on the other side by the heavy hardware of Earthrealm's military. To Alex Mercer, the Special Forces camp looked like a ghost of Blackwatch. Humvees with mounted .50 caliber machine guns were positioned in a defensive semicircle, their barrels pointed toward the shimmering portal. Soldiers in tactical gear moved with a precision that Mercer respected, a martial discipline that lacked the savage unpredictability of the Tarkatans, but possessed a terrifying collective efficiency. These men and women were fighting a war of survival against gods and monsters, and they were doing it with lead and steel. Mercer didn't approach with stealth. He walked out of the purple Outworld haze and onto the gravel of the base's perimeter, his hood pulled low. To the sentries, he was an anomaly, a man in civilian clothes walking out of a wasteland that should have claimed his life an hour ago. "Halt! Hands where I can see them," a voice barked over a loudspeaker. Mercer stopped. He didn't raise his hands. Instead, his eyes scanned the base, identifying the command tent, the fuel reserves, and the communications array. He needed to know the status of the invasion on Earth. He needed to know if New York still existed, or if it had been consumed by something even more voracious than himself. A woman stepped forward from the line of soldiers. She was blonde, her hair pulled back in a tight professional bun, wearing a tactical vest over a gray shirt. Sonya Blade didn't look like a typical soldier. She had the aura of a woman who had stared into the abyss and punched it in the face. Beside her stood a mountain of a man with dark skin and arms that caught the light of the portal. They weren't flesh. From the shoulders down, Jax Briggs was a marvel of cybernetic engineering, heavy, reinforced pistons and hydraulic servos that hummed with a low, menacing vibrato. "I'm only going to say this once," Sonya said, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. "We're in the middle of a planetary invasion. If you're a refugee, get to the secondary perimeter. If you're one of Shang Tsung's shapeshifters, I'm going to enjoy watching Jax turn you into a puddle." "I'm not a refugee," Mercer said, his voice flat and devoid of human warmth. "And I'm not a sorcerer. I'm looking for a way home."
Jax took a step forward, his metallic fingers flexing. "Home? Kid, if you're from Earth, you picked the worst time to visit. New York is currently being merged with a realm that makes this place look like a vacation spot. Now hands up, or we start the interrogation phase." Mercer's expression didn't change, but internally, the Blacklight virus reacted to the mention of New York. The city was being merged. His hunting ground was being stolen. "New York is mine," Mercer whispered, a sound that carried across the gravel like the rustle of 1,000 dead leaves. "What did he say?" Sonya narrowed her eyes. "Soldiers, prepare to engage. We have a code blue, biohazard suspicion." The command was all it took. The Special Forces soldiers, trained to deal with the supernatural, didn't hesitate. A dozen assault rifles barked in unison, a hail of 5.56mm rounds tearing into Mercer's chest and shoulders. Any other man would have been reduced to red mist, but as the bullets impacted, they didn't penetrate. They hit Mercer's skin and flattened, falling to the gravel like spent copper rain. The Blacklight virus absorbed the kinetic energy, the biomass beneath the leather jacket shifting and hardening into an invisible subdermal mesh of hyperdense fibers. "He's not human!" Sonya shouted. "Jax, take him down! Use the sonic emitters!" Jax roared, launching himself forward. He didn't use a weapon, he used his fists. He slammed a cybernetic hook into Mercer's jaw with enough force to flip a tank. Mercer's head snapped back, his neck twisting at an impossible angle, but he didn't fall. He caught the next punch, a straight right that should have shattered his ribs, with his bare hand. The sound of metal meeting viral chitin was like a sledgehammer hitting a block of granite. "Nice arms," Mercer said, his neck cracking as his biomass forced his head back into place. "Let's see what's inside." Mercer's right hand shifted, his fingers elongating into the jagged claws. He swiped at Jax, the razor-sharp viral bone whistling through the air. Jax jumped back, the claws leaving deep gouges in the reinforced titanium of his forearms. The big man's eyes widened. He had fought the cyborgs of the Lin Kuei and the monsters of Outworld, but he had never seen a human body transform with such fluid, terrifying speed. Sonya unleashed a barrage of energy rings from her wrist-mounted emitters. The pink-hued kinetic blast struck Mercer's back, knocking him off balance and sending him stumbling toward a parked Humvee. Mercer didn't recover. He adapted. He grabbed the rear bumper of the 3-ton vehicle and, with a terrifying display of raw strength, swung it over his head like a club. "Get back!" Sonya screamed, as the Humvee flew through the air. The soldiers scattered, the vehicle smashing into the communications array in a spectacular explosion of glass and sparks. Mercer didn't wait for the fire to die down. He initiated a ground strike attack, slamming his fists into the gravel. Dozens of jagged, blackened pillars of biomass erupted beneath the Special Forces line, impaling 2 soldiers and tossing the others into the air. He wasn't killing for sport, he was clearing the field to get to the prize.
He reached out with a whip fist, the long, serrated lash snagging a fleeing lieutenant by the ankle. With a violent jerk, he pulled the officer toward him. Sonya fired her sidearm, the bullets pinging off Mercer's armored back, but she couldn't stop the consumption. The lieutenant was absorbed in a blur of red tendrils before he could even scream. A flood of tactical data hit Mercer's mind. The portal coordinates, the status of the New York breach, the presence of the Deadly Alliance, a sorceress pact between Shang Tsung and a necromancer named Quan Chi. He saw images of the city he knew, now draped in green soul fire, with Shao Kahn's Colossus walking through Times Square. Jax regained his footing and charged again, his arms glowing with a purple energy charge, a kinetic amplification that turned his punches into small explosions. "You're gonna pay for that, you freak!" Jax unleashed a gotcha grab, his massive hands pinning Mercer's shoulders as he delivered a series of rapid-fire piston-driven punches to Mercer's face. Each hit was like a grenade going off. Mercer's flesh was being torn away in chunks, revealing the writhing black and red mass of the virus beneath. But Mercer didn't feel pain. He felt opportunity. As Jack's metal hands gripped his shoulders, Mercer's biomass began to flow around the cybernetics. Small, needle-like tendrils began to probe the seams of Jack's mechanical arms, seeking the neural interface where the metal met the man. "You're brave," Mercer hissed, his face a ruin of shifting cells that were already reforming. "But you're just a man in a can." Mercer's arms shifted into his hammer fists, but he didn't swing them. He used them to grip Jack's cybernetic wrists. With a surge of strength that far exceeded Jack's hydraulic limiters, Mercer began to peel the titanium plating back. The screech of tortured metal filled the air. "Sonya, help!" Jax grunted, his feet digging into the gravel as he tried to resist the literal unmaking of his hardware. Sonya prepared to launch a leg grab to pull Mercer away, but before she could move, a shadow fell over the camp. A massive four-armed Shokan warrior, not Goro, but a female general named Shiva, leaped from the top of the portal arch, landing between the special forces and Mercer. She was followed by a swarm of Tarkatan warriors. The Outworld invasion force had arrived to reclaim the breach. Mercer let go of Jax, his eyes shifted to the new threat. He saw Shiva, her skin like bronze, her four arms rippling with muscle. She looked at the carnage Mercer had wrought and let out a guttural laugh. "This one is not with the Earthlings," she rumbled, her voice like grinding tectonic plates. "He is a monster after my own heart. Shao Kahn will want to see what kind of creature can bleed the special forces so effectively." Mercer looked at Shiva, then back at Jax and Sonya. He was surrounded by two armies, in a world that was trying to eat his home. He let his armor form slide over his skin, the heavy, spiked plates locking into place. His eyes glowed with a predatory hunger. "I'm not a monster," Mercer said, his voice a choir of the fallen. The standoff lasted only as long as it took for Shiva to draw her breath for a war cry. The Shokan general didn't believe in the nuance of diplomacy. She believed in the crushing weight of her four fists. With a roar that shook the transport crates of the Special Forces base, she leaped. Mercer didn't move until she was a blur of bronze skin above him. He shifted into his shield form, but not to block, to parry. As Shiva's upper hands came down with the force of a falling temple, Mercer angled the viral plate, letting the momentum of her strike slide to the side, then used his whip fist to snag her lower left ankle. Shiva was a mountain of muscle, but Mercer's viral physiology allowed him to exert torque that defied human anatomy. He spun, swinging the half-ton Shokan through the air and slamming her into a group of approaching Tarkatans. The impact was sickening, a crunch of bone and chitin that left a crater in the gravel. "Target the freak," Sonya Blade's voice cut through the chaos. She wasn't talking about Shiva. The Special Forces opened fire, a desperate attempt to regain control of their perimeter. Mercer ignored the small arms fire, the lead pellets simply being absorbed into his armor form with a metallic pinging sound. He was focused on the portal. The shimmering gateway was his bridge to Manhattan, but it was being guarded by the bulk of the Outworld vanguard. He needed a distraction. That distraction arrived in a flash of cold blue light and the hum of high-frequency teleportation. From the shadows of the base's hangar, 3 figures appeared. They weren't flesh, yet they weren't entirely machines. They were the Len Kui cyborgs, the pinnacle of the cyber initiative. Leading them was Sector, his chassis a predatory blood-red hue, his optical sensors glowing with a cold, analytical light. Beside him was Cyrax, the yellow-clad unit whose internal logic was still at war with his remaining humanity, and a squad of generic cyber ninjas. "The Grand Master requires new data." Sector's voice was a digitized rasp, devoid of emotion. He ignored Sonya and Shiva entirely, his sensors locking onto Mercer. "Biological anomaly detected. Species unknown. Adaptive capability maximum. Priority capture for automation." Mercer turned, his blade arm dripping with Tarkatan ichor. He looked at Sector and felt a strange, cold sensation. The cyborgs had no scent of blood, no warmth of DNA. They were husks of metal housing digitized souls. "You're late," Mercer said, his voice overlapping with the voices of the soldiers he had consumed. Sector didn't trade quips. He raised his arm, a panel sliding back to reveal a rack of seeker missiles.
They launched with a hiss of white smoke, weaving through the air with heat-seeking precision. Mercer attempted to swap them down with his whip fist, but the missiles were programmed with evasive maneuvers. They impacted his chest and shoulders in rapid succession, the high-explosive payload staggering even his armored form.
Before the smoke could clear, Sector was on him. The cyborg used his teleport uppercut, disappearing into the ground and erupting beneath Mercer's chin. The blow sent Mercer soaring upward. Sector followed, his jet boosters roaring as he caught Mercer midair and unleashed a flamethrower blast from his wrists. The intense heat of the Lin Kuei fire was different from Raiden's lightning, but equally dangerous. It threatened to cook the Blacklight virus within its chitinous shell. Mercer roared, his body expanding into a viral pulse. Hundreds of red, needle-thin tendrils exploded outward in a 360-degree radius. The tendrils didn't just strike Sector, they sought the gaps in his armor. Scanning. Intrusion detected. Sector's internal computer chirped. Biological corruption in system link. Initiating purge. Mercer slammed into the ground, his body smoking, but he was smiling. As Sector landed, the red cyborg's movements were jerky, his servos whining. The Blacklight virus wasn't just meat, it was an organic computer, a hive mind that could interface with electronic signals. The tendrils that had struck Sector had carried a payload of techno-organic infection, a strain of the virus Mercer had developed back in New York to subvert Gentek's automated systems. "What is this?" Sector's voice glitched, dropping an octave. His arm raised to fire a missile, but the panel jammed, held shut by writhing black and red muscle that was growing out of the metal seams. "You wanted to automate me?" Mercer walked towards Sector, his hand shifting into his hammer fist. "I think I'll return the favor. I've never eaten a machine before. Let's see if your memories are stored in your circuits." Mercer gripped Sector's head. The cyborg struggled, his flamethrowers flickering feebly, but the virus was already inside his central processor. Mercer didn't consume Sector's flesh. There was precious little of it left, but he initiated a data consumption. He forced his tendrils into the neural link ports at the base of Sector's skull. A digital fire hose of information slammed into Mercer's consciousness. The Lin Kuei temple coordinates, the process of cybernetic conversion, the Grandmaster's plan to replace all human life with the perfect machine. But there was something else, a deeper, darker protocol, the location of the hourglass. Mercer saw flashes of a woman in white, a titan of time named Chronica, who was observing the realms like a scientist at a microscope. The interaction was a nightmare for both. Sector's digital arrogance was being unmade by the chaotic, organic hunger of the virus, while Mercer's mind was being flooded with the rigid, cold logic of the Lin Kuei. For a moment, Mercer's form flickered, his armor taking on the angular, metallic aesthetic of the cyborgs. His eyes turned from predatory yellow to a haunting, electronic red.
Cyrax, seeing his leader being subverted, launched a green net of energy to pull Mercer away. The net hit Mercer's back, but instead of trapping him, the virus simply flowed through the gaps in the energy mesh. Mercer turned his gaze to Cyrax, his voice now carrying a digitized mechanical edge. "Your humanity is a glitch in their system, Cyrax," Mercer said, the names and files of the Lin Kuei scrolling behind his eyes. "I can fix that. I can give you a different kind of life." Shiva, having recovered, saw the cyborg and the virus man locked in their strange struggle. She saw an opportunity to end both threats. She leaped into the air, aiming to crush them both beneath her massive weight. "Enough of these toys," Shiva screamed. But Mercer was no longer just a biological predator. He was a techno-organic nightmare. Without looking, he raised his left hand. It didn't turn into a blade. It shifted into a biomechanical pulse cannon that mirrored Sector's own technology, fueled by the kinetic energy of his own cellular metabolism. He fired a blast of compressed, viral-charged air that hit Shiva mid-air, the force of the impact sending the four-armed queen crashing through the roof of a special forces barracks. Sector collapsed, his systems rebooting in an emergency safe mode, but Mercer had what he needed. He had the cybermap. He knew how to bypass the security protocols of the portal. He didn't need the special forces, and he didn't need the Shokin. He turned toward the portal, his body a chaotic blend of blackened armor and glowing red circuitry. He looked at Sonya and Jax, who were standing back, their weapons raised but their faces filled with a new, profound horror. They had seen monsters before, but they had never seen a virus that could eat a machine and learn its language. "Stay out of my way," Mercer warned, his voice a distorted harmony of meat and metal. "The next thing I consume won't be a soldier, it'll be the realm itself." He stepped into the shimmering light of the portal. He wasn't going to New York to save it. He was going there to ensure that whatever was trying to merge with his city realized that the apex predator had returned, and he was no longer bound by the laws of biology.
The portal didn't deposit Mercer back into the Manhattan he remembered. He stepped out onto the asphalt of Times Square, but the iconic neon billboards were flickering with a sickly green light, their advertisements for Broadway shows replaced by the jagged, runic propaganda of Outworld. The skyscrapers were being throttled by massive obsidian spikes that grew from the earth like the teeth of a subterranean god. The air was a thick, humid soup of car exhaust and the sulfurous stench of Shao Kahn's war camps. Manhattan wasn't just being invaded, it was being digested. Mercer stood in the center of the intersection, his viral senses overwhelmed. In his old life, this place was a buffet of millions. Now the streets were littered with the half-eaten remains of civilians, and the predators stalking the alleys were things from a nightmare. He saw a squad of Centaurian warriors, massive four-legged brutes with metallic tails, herding survivors into the subway tunnels. To Mercer, this scene was an insult. This was his territory. These were his people to consume, his biomass to claim. "You," a voice echoed through the canyon of buildings. It was a chorus, thousands of voices speaking as one, vibrating with a telekinetic hum. A figure descended from the rooftop of a ruined hotel. He wore red and black robes, his face obscured by a mask, but his eyes glowed with a restless emerald fire. This was Ermac, the construct of 1,000 souls. He didn't walk, he floated, his very presence causing the loose gravel and glass on the street to hover in a localized gravitational field. "We sense a void," Ermac spoke, his voices overlapping in a dissonant harmony. "You are many, yet you are none. Your body is a tomb of stolen lives, but we feel no spirits within. You are an anomaly that must be corrected." Mercer didn't wait for the lecture. He shifted his legs into muscle mass form, his thighs bulging with hyperdense fibers, and leaped. He cleared 50 feet in a single bound, his blade arm extended for a decapitating strike. Ermac simply raised a hand. A wave of green telekinetic energy slammed into Mercer midair, pinning him against the side of a bus with the force of a hydraulic press. "We are many," Ermac intoned, his hand closing into a fist. The telekinetic pressure began to crush Mercer's armor form, the chitinous plates cracking and splintering. Mercer roared, but the sound was muffled by the green energy. He felt the souls within Ermac trying to find his own, searching for a spark of life to extinguish, only to find the cold, calculating hunger of the Blacklight virus. The confusion of the souls gave Mercer the opening he needed. He didn't fight the pressure. He turned into a liquid. He collapsed his skeletal structure, his entire body becoming a slurry of red tendrils that jerked through the telekinetic grip and hit the pavement. Before Ermac could recalibrate, Mercer reformed beneath him and launched a ground spike attack. Ermac drifted upward to avoid the impalement, but a second voice interrupted the execution. "Enough, Ermac. This one is far more valuable than a pile of discarded souls."
From the shadows of a nearby alley, Shang Tsung emerged. He looked different than he had in the flesh pits, younger, his skin smooth and his hair dark, having clearly feasted on the souls of the fallen New Yorkers. He walked with a swagger that suggested he already owned the city. "You followed me through the breach," Mercer hissed, his whip fist snaking out to pulse rhythmically at his side. "I should have eaten you when I had the chance." Shang Tsung smiled, a gesture that was entirely devoid of warmth. "And missed the opportunity of a lifetime, Alex? I've been watching you. I saw what you did to the Tarkatans, to the Thunder God, and most impressively, to Sector. You don't just kill, you adapt. You are the ultimate vessel." "I don't work for sorcerers," Mercer said, his biomass coiling for a lunge. "I'm not asking you to work," Shang Tsung countered, raising a small, ornate vial made of crystal and bone. Inside, a single drop of glowing golden blood pulsed with an air light. "I'm offering you a trade. My Emperor is a blunt instrument. He wants to crush this realm. I want to evolve it. And I have something you want, something the Blacklight virus has never encountered. Mercer's eyes locked onto the vial. His viral senses, heightened by the integration of Sector's technology, analyzed the substance from 10 feet away. It wasn't just DNA. It was ancient. It carried the signature of a martial perfection that predated the modern era by centuries. "The great Kung Lao," Shang Tsung whispered, "the original champion of Mortal Kombat. I took his soul 500 years ago, but I kept his body, his genetic blueprint, in stasis. His DNA contains the secrets of the spirit fire, a biological ability to channel the life force of the realms into physical power. Consume this, and you won't just be a monster of meat, you'll be a champion of the elements." Mercer hesitated. He knew the sorcerer was a snake. He knew that any gift from Shang Tsung likely came with a hidden parasite or a metaphysical leash. But the hunger, the constant gnawing need to become the apex, was louder than his caution. "What do you want in exchange?" Mercer said, his voice a low growl. "Earthrealm has defenders," Shang Tsung said, gesturing toward the smoking ruins of the Brooklyn Bridge. "Raiden has gathered his chosen ones, Liu Kang and Kung Lao. They are currently dismantling our forward base in the harbor. They represent a threat to my long-term interests. Kill them, bring me their souls, and you can have the DNA of the man who started it all." Mercer looked at the vial, then at the sorcerer. He didn't care about Shao Kahn's invasion, and he certainly didn't care about Earthrealm survival. He only cared about the evolution. "I'll take the vial first," Mercer said. Shang Tsung laughed and tossed the crystal bone vial through the air. Mercer caught it, his hand instantly beginning to dissolve the container. As the golden blood touched his viral mass, Mercer fell to his knees.
The transformation was violent. His body didn't just shift, it ignited. White-hot fire erupted from his pores, the Blacklight virus screaming as it was forced to integrate the spirit fire of the great Kung Lao. His muscles tore and reformed, his bone structure becoming light and resonant like a temple bell. He wasn't just a tank anymore. He felt a strange, terrifying fluidness. He could feel the chi of the city, the dying life force of Manhattan, and for the first time, he knew how to weaponize it. He stood up, his eyes now glowing with a steady golden ember. He looked at Shang Tsung, who was watching him with the predatory pride of a scientist who had just created a monster he intended to use. "The harbor," Mercer said, his voice now carrying a resonance that rattled the windows of the nearby buildings. "I'll bring you the bodies. The souls are yours." "A fair trade," Shang Tsung bowed slightly. "Go, Alex Mercer. Show the Shaolin what happens when 500 years of legend meets the future of infection." As Mercer blurred toward the harbor, moving with a speed that left trails of golden flame on the asphalt, Shang Tsung's smile widened. He hadn't told Mercer everything. The DNA of the great Kung Lao was indeed powerful, but it was also a homing beacon. By consuming it, Mercer had marked himself. To Raiden and his champions, Mercer would no longer look like a man or even a monster. He would look like a desecration of their greatest hero. The battle for Earthrealm was about to become personal. The New York harbor was a graveyard of steel and salt. The massive container ships that once fueled the city's commerce were now scorched husks, listing in the dark, churning water of the Atlantic. Mercer landed on the deck of a capsized freighter, the golden spirit fire of the great Kung Lao still crackling beneath his skin like an untamed lightning storm. Through the haze of smoke and sea spray, he saw them, the two Shaolin monks standing atop the ruins of a collapsed pier. Liu Kang, the champion of Earthrealm, and Kung Lao, the descendant of the man whose DNA now coursed through Mercer's viral veins. They didn't look like the soldiers Mercer was used to. There was a stillness to them, a centered gravity that made the chaotic destruction of the harbor seem to retreat. But as Mercer approached, his boots thudding against the hollow metal of the ship, the stillness shattered. I felt the ripple in the jinsei, Liu Kang said, his voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the roar of the fires. He stepped forward, his hands igniting with orange dragon fire. But I did not expect to see a monster wearing the essence of our ancestor as a shroud. You are a thief of legacies, creature. Kung Lao's eyes were cold, his hand resting on the rim of his razor-sharp hat. He is more than a thief, Liu. He is a desecration. Look at his hands. The blood of our people is etched into his very cells. Mercer didn't offer a defense. He didn't have one. He simply let the Blacklight virus expand, his arms shifting into a hybrid form, the serrated blades of a Tarkatan general, but now wreathed in the shimmering golden fire of the Shaolin. He launched himself across the water, his feet skimming the surface, propelled by a burst of kinetic viral pressure. The battle that followed was a masterclass in lethal grace. Liu Kang moved like water, his bicycle kick a blurring series of strikes that tested the limits of Mercer's armor form. Kung Lao was a whirlwind of steel, his hat whistling through the air in unpredictable trajectories that carved deep furrows into Mercer's biomass. But Mercer was no longer just a brawler. He was using the martial data of the great Kung Lao. He parried a dragonfire punch with a spirit-charged palm strike, the collision of energies creating a localized vacuum that sucked the oxygen from the air. You have his moves, Kung Lao hissed, catching his hat mid-air and diving into a spinning teleport, but you have none of his soul. The soul is a luxury, Mercer retorted, his voice a jagged harmony of 100 consumed warriors. I prefer the hardware.
He unleashed a viral ground pound, but instead of black spikes, the earth erupted in pillars of golden, spiritual flame. The shockwave staggered the monks, but before Mercer could capitalize, the sky darkened, not with storm clouds, but with a swirling, necrotic vortex of bone-white energy. The ground beneath them didn't just crack, it dissolved into a pit of obsidian shadow. From the depths, a series of massive skeletal chains erupted, snagging Mercer's limbs. He roared, his blade arm swinging to sever the restraints, but the chains were made of soul steel, designed to bind the essence rather than the flesh. Such a fascinating specimen, a new voice echoed, cold and dripping with the arrogance of the grave. Quan Chi, the arch-sorcerer of the Netherrealm, stepped out of a portal of green flame. Beside him stood a group of revenants, undead, corrupted versions of fallen Earthrealm heroes. The necromancer looked at Mercer with the eyes of a jeweler examining a flawed but priceless diamond. Shang Tsung is a fool, Quan Chi said, his pale skin glowing in the twilight. He thinks to use you as a weapon for the surface. He does not realize that a creature with no soul is the perfect vessel for the fires of the Netherrealm. You are a blank scroll, Alex Mercer. I shall write your destiny in the blood of the damned. The chains tightened, pulling Mercer toward the dark rift. Liu Kang and Kung Lao moved to intervene, but the revenants intercepted them. Mercer fought with everything he had, his biomass thrashing, his spirit fire flaring in a desperate attempt to burn through the sorcery. But the Netherrealm was a vacuum, and it was hungry. With a final violent jerk, the chains dragged Mercer into the abyss. The descent was a blur of screaming faces and freezing cold. When Mercer finally slammed into the ground, he found himself in a realm of eternal twilight. This was the Netherrealm. The ground was composed of crushed bone and volcanic ash. The sun was a distant, dying ember of red light, and the air tasted of brimstone and ancient, unwashed sin. Mercer stood up, his body smoking. He felt a sudden, terrifying hollow in his chest.
The spirit fire he had consumed from Shang Tsung was gone, extinguished by the oppressive, anti-life atmosphere of the hell dimension. Worse, the Blacklight virus was beginning to stagnate. Mercer lived on consumption, on the constant intake of living DNA. He looked around. A group of Netherrealm demons, low-level Oni with bloated bellies and jagged teeth, were circling him. Mercer didn't hesitate. He launched a whip fist, the serrated lash tearing through the nearest demon's throat. He pulled the creature in, his tendrils erupting to initiate consumption. He waited for the rush of data. He waited for the surge of energy. It never came. As the demon was absorbed, Mercer felt nothing but a mouthful of ash. There was no DNA in these creatures. They were constructs of shadow and suffering, held together by the will of the necromancer. To the Blacklight virus, the Netherrealm was a desert. There was no food here, no evolution, only the slow, agonizing decay of his own biomass. "You feel it, don't you?" Quan Chi appeared on a ridge above him, his arms folded. "In this place, you are nothing. You are a parasite without a host. Your virus is starving." Mercer's armor form flickered, the plates becoming thin and brittle. "I've survived worse," he gasped, his voice cracking. "You have survived life," Quan Chi countered, descending the ridge with feline grace. "But you have never encountered the absence of it. Join me, Mercer. Serve as my champion, and I will provide you with the essence you crave. I have thousands of revenants, thousands of souls trapped in cages of meat. I can feed you for an eternity." Mercer looked at the sorcerer. He saw the green light of the necromancy and realized that Quan Chi didn't want a champion. He wanted a biological prison for his enemies. If Mercer agreed, he would become a living sarcophagus, his body used to house the souls Quan Chi couldn't break. "I don't serve," Mercer snarled. He tried to shift his arm into a hammer fist, but the transition was sluggish, the biomass gray and sluggish. "Then you will starve in the dark," Quan Chi said, raising his hand to summon a legion of shadow wraiths. "And when your body finally fails, I will peel the virus from your bones and see what makes it scream." Mercer looked at the approaching wraiths. He was in the heart of hell, his powers failing and his stomach empty. But as the first wraith lunged, Mercer felt a spark of something deep within his core. It wasn't the spirit fire, and it wasn't the memories of the consumed. It was the original primal instinct of the virus, the will to survive in an environment that hated it. If there was no DNA to consume, he would have to consume the magic itself. He would have to teach the Blacklight virus how to eat the dark. The shadow wraiths did not move like warriors. They drifted like smoke, their forms flickering between the skeletal remains of men and the jagged geometry of the void. As they closed the circle, Mercer felt his viral hive mind beginning to fragment. Without a steady stream of complex proteins and genetic data, the Blacklight virus was turning on itself, the trillion-cell collective attempting to consume its own inner layers to stay functional. His armor form flaked away in gray, ash-like scales, exposing the raw, weeping biomass beneath. Quan Chi watched from his perch, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. "You are a fascinating machine, Mercer, but every machine requires fuel. In this realm, the only fuel is agony. If you cannot learn to feast on it, you are merely another heap of refuse for the pits." The first wraith lunged, its translucent claws passing through Mercer's shoulder. It didn't draw blood, it drew warmth. Mercer felt a coldness more profound than ice settle into his marrow. The wraith was literally siphoning the kinetic energy of his cells. He swung a hammer fist, but the blow passed through the specter with a sickening lack of resistance. He was trying to punch a shadow. "Adapt," Mercer hissed, the voice of the great Kung Lao flickering in his mind. "If it has no blood, find the thread that holds it together." Mercer stopped fighting with strength. He retracted his weapons, his body becoming a lean, shivering mass of red tendrils. As the next wraith dove into his chest, Mercer didn't push it out. He opened himself. He commanded his viral cells to stop trying to digest the specter, and instead to mimic its frequency. The Blacklight virus, an entity born of supreme mimicry, began to analyze the necrotic magic holding the wraith together. It wasn't DNA, but it was information, a sequence of suffering, a code of hate. From Mercer's chest, a different kind of tendril emerged. They weren't red and wet, they were blackened, smoking with a cold green fire. He snagged the wraith from the inside. The specter shrieked, a sound that echoed through the canyons of the Netherrealm, as Mercer began to pull the shadow into his cellular structure. He was consuming the magic. He was becoming a necrovirus. The surge of energy was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't the warm rush of life. It was a jolt of pure, frigid power that sent his biomass into a frenzy. His armor reformed, but it was no longer chitinous. It was obsidian, etched with the glowing green runes of the Netherrealm. His blade arm didn't just cut, it left trails of soul-burning fire in the air. "Impossible," Quan Chi whispered, his composure finally cracking. "No living thing can internalize the energy of the void without being unmade." "I told you," Mercer roared, his voice now a booming thunder of the damned. "I'm not alive." He launched himself at Quan Chi, but before he could reach the sorcerer, a spear of white-hot hellfire whistled through the air, impaling Mercer's shoulder and pinning him to a basalt pillar. "Get over here!" With a violent yank, Mercer was pulled across the ash plain. He crashed into the ground at the feet of a warrior clad in yellow and black. Scorpion, the specter of the Shirai Ryu, stood with his hands wreathed in the fires of hell. His skull-like mask glowed with the intensity of his vengeance. "You have the scent of the thief," Scorpion growled, his voice a guttural rasp from the depths of his charred throat. "You carry the essence of the Shaolin, yet you gorge yourself on the filth of this realm. You are a monster that serves no master, and I will see you burn to ash." Mercer stood up, snapping the chain that still hung from his shoulder. He looked at Scorpion and saw the perfect specimen. Scorpion was a specter, yes, but he possessed a physical vessel, a body held together by the sheer force of his will and the fires of the Netherrealm. He was the bridge Mercer needed. "I don't have time for your vendettas, ninja," Mercer said, his new obsidian armor pulsing with green light. "I have an emperor to kill." The two specters clashed in a storm of fire and shadow. Scorpion moved with a supernatural agility, his twin katanas carving arcs of flame through the air. Mercer met him with his necro blades, the two weapons clashing with a sound like the world's heart breaking. Every time Scorpion's hellfire touched Mercer, the virus screamed, but it also learned. It began to incorporate the thermal resistance of the Shirai Ryu warrior. Mercer saw an opening and used his whip fist, the blackened lash snagging Scorpion's neck. Instead of pulling him in, Mercer channeled the necro energy he had just consumed from the wraiths back through the line. The green lightning of the Netherrealm collided with Scorpion's orange hellfire, creating a cataclysmic explosion that leveled the nearby bone towers. In the confusion, Mercer didn't go for the kill. He went for the connection. He lunged at Scorpion Scorpion, his hand shifting into hundreds of microtendrils that pierced Scorpion's armor. For a split second, Mercer's hive mind touched Scorpion's soul. He saw the fire. He saw the massacre of the Shirai Ryu. He saw the face of the man who had really killed Scorpion's family, Quan Chi. "He's lying to you," Mercer gasped, the sheer weight of Scorpion's grief nearly crushing his viral consciousness. Scorpion froze, his blades inches from Mercer's throat. "What did you say?" "The sorcerer." Mercer pointed a jagged claw toward the ridge where Quan Chi was preparing a finishing spell. "He didn't just find you. He made you. He killed your clan. I saw it in his memories when I touched his magic."
Scorpion turned his gaze toward Quan Chi. The sorcerer's eyes widened, and he immediately began to chant a spell of banishment. But Scorpion was faster. He vanished in a pillar of fire and reappeared behind the necromancer, his hands gripping Quan Chi's throat. Mercer didn't wait to see the outcome. He knew the distraction wouldn't last. He focused on the residue of the portal Quan Chi had used to bring him here. Now that he had internalized the magic of the Netherrealm, Mercer could see the dimensional tethers. He reached out with both hands, his biomass expanding into a massive blackened web that latched onto the fabric of reality itself. "I'm going back," Mercer growled. With a violent guttural roar, Mercer tore the rift open. He didn't use a sorcerer's key. He used the brute force of his evolved biology to rip a hole back to Earthrealm. He stepped through the black fire, leaving the Netherrealm behind. He emerged, not in the harbor, but in the heart of the invasion, the steps of the United Nations building in New York. The sky was no longer purple or green. It was a bruised, bleeding red. Standing atop a pile of destroyed tanks was a figure that made the Shao Kahn and the Tarkatans look like children. Shao Kahn, the Emperor of Outworld, stood 10 feet tall, his massive warhammer, the Wrath Hammer, resting on his shoulder. He looked down at the man who had just torn a hole out of hell, and a deep, rumbling laugh shook the very foundations of the city. "So," the Emperor boomed, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds, "the creature that has been eating my generals finally shows his face. Tell me, beast, do you prefer to die as a man or as a stain on my boot?" Mercer stood at the base of the steps, his obsidian armor smoking, his golden spirit fire and green necro energy swirling together in a chaotic, unstable union. He looked at the Emperor and felt the final stage of his evolution clicking into place. "I'm not a man," Mercer said, his voice now a chorus of everyone he had ever consumed. Baraka, the soldiers, the Shaolin, the demons. "And I'm not your subject. I'm the end of your empire." Shao Kahn did not move with the speed of the ninja or the grace of the Shaolin. He moved with the tectonic inevitability of a mountain. As Mercer took his first step up the granite stairs of the United Nations, the Emperor swung the Wrath Hammer. It wasn't just a physical strike. The weapon trailed a wake of translucent, screaming souls, a kinetic boom that shattered the windows of every building within 3 blocks. Mercer barely brought his necro shield up in time. The impact didn't just push him back, it pulverized the stone beneath his feet and sent him hurtling through a parked armored personnel carrier, the thick steel crumpling like tinfoil around his frame. "You are a scavenger, creature," Shao Kahn bellowed, his voice amplified by the magical resonance of his skull mask. "You have feasted on the scraps of my table, the Tarkatans, the sorcerers, the weak-willed. But I am the table, I am the feast, I am Outworld." Mercer tore himself out of the wreckage. His obsidian armor was cracked,
the green netherrealm energy leaking out like radioactive steam. His spirit fire flickered, struggling to find a balance with the cold rot of the void. He felt his viral integrity wavering. The Blacklight virus was reaching its saturation point. It had consumed too many conflicting frequencies of power: the divine lightning of Raiden, the cyborg logic of Sector, the martial purity of the Shaolin, and the necrotic filth of Hell. He was a biological ticking time bomb. "I've heard enough speeches," Mercer spat, his voice a jagged distortion. He didn't use a blade, he didn't use a whip, he used everything. Mercer launched himself forward, his body blurring into a divergence dash that left 3 illusory afterimages of red tendrils. Shao Kahn laughed and unleashed a light arrow, a spear of pure, solidified soul energy. It pierced through Mercer's shoulder, but the virus simply flowed around the wound, refusing to slow down. Mercer closed the distance, his hands shifting into hammer fists that glowed with the combined golden and green light of his journey. The 2 titans collided at the base of the UN's massive bronze doors. It was a brawl that transcended martial arts. It was a collision of existential philosophies. Kahn represented the absolute order of conquest: one realm, one ruler, one soul. Mercer was the absolute chaos of consumption, all things becoming one within the hive. Kahn landed a shoulder charge that sent Mercer through the heavy doors and into the General Assembly Hall. The Emperor followed, his boots echoing on the polished wood. He grabbed Mercer by the throat with a hand that could crush a dragon's skull. "I can feel it now," Kahn hissed, his eyes glowing behind his mask. "You have no soul, yet you house thousands of voices. You are a living jar of stolen essences. When I break you, I will reclaim all that you have taken. I will merge your mass into my own, and the black light will become the shadow of Shao Kahn."
The Emperor began to chant, his hand glowing with a deep, pulsing crimson. He wasn't just trying to kill Mercer, he was initiating a soul drain on a biological level. He was trying to rip the memories and the power directly out of Mercer's cells. The pain was absolute. Mercer felt his mind being peeled back like an onion. He saw the faces of everyone he had consumed: the terrified Gentech scientists, the brave Special Forces soldiers, the savage Baraka. They were being pulled toward the Emperor's maw. For a second, Alex Mercer, the original consciousness, was a small, flickering light in a hurricane of red fire. "Let him," a voice whispered in the back of the hive mind. It sounded like the great Kung Lao. "Let him take it all." Mercer realized the truth. Shao Kahn's strength was his ability to control souls, but Mercer wasn't a soul. He was an infection. By trying to drain Mercer, the Emperor was opening his own spiritual defenses. He was inviting the virus in. "You want my mass," Mercer gasped, his eyes turning a solid, terrifying black. "Then take all of it." Mercer didn't resist the drain. He accelerated it. He triggered a critical mass devastator, but instead of exploding outward, he forced the entirety of his viral mass to collapse inward toward Kahn's hand. Thousands of miles of red tendrils, the necro energy, the spirit fire, and the Blacklight virus itself became a single high-pressure needle of biological information. The Emperor's eyes widened. He tried to let go, but the tendrils had already fused with his gauntlets, burrowing into his skin, seeking the ancient, powerful DNA of the Conqueror. Kahn roared in pain, a sound that shook the rafters of the Great Hall. He swung his wrath hammer with his free hand, smashing into Mercer's side again and again, but Mercer was no longer a solid object. He was a liquid predator, flowing up the Emperor's arm, coating his chest, invading his very lungs. "What is this?" Kahn choked, his green soul fire flickering and turning a muddy, diseased red. "I am the Emperor. I am the host." "Not Mercer's voice came from everywhere, from the air, from the shadows, and from within Khan's own throat. With a final, explosive surge, Mercer regained his physical form, tearing himself out of the Emperor's chest cavity in a spray of golden blood and black ichor. Shao Kahn fell back against the podium where world leaders once spoke, his massive chest heaving, his armor shattered. The Conqueror was dying. For the first time in 10,000 years, Shao Kahn looked at an opponent and saw his own fatality approaching. The Emperor slumped, his hammer falling from his nerveless grip. The finish him moment hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The entire city seemed to go silent, the distant sounds of the invasion fading as the one being of the virus stood over the one ruler of Outworld.
Mercer's arm shifted. It didn't become a blade. It became a long, needle-like spike, vibrating with the collective power of everything he had absorbed since the flesh pits. He had a choice. He could consume the Emperor, integrating the DNA of a god-tier conqueror and effectively becoming the new ruler of Outworld and Earthrealm. Or he could show a mercy he had never known, leaving Khan as a broken shell and ending the cycle of consumption. He looked at Khan's mask, the symbol of 10,000 years of suffering. He looked at his own hands, the tools of a plague that had started in a lab and ended in a throne room. "Your soul belongs to the realms," Mercer said, his voice dropping to a cold, singular whisper. "But your body, that belongs to me." Mercer's arm drove forward. The spike did not merely pierce Shao Kahn's flesh, it acted as a conduit for the total, systematic unmaking of the Emperor's biological history. As the tip of Mercer's viral blade settled into Khan's heart, the black and red tendrils of the Blacklight virus erupted from the point of impact like a blooming dark star. They didn't just tear through muscle and bone. They sought out the ancient, hyper-dense genetic markers that had allowed Shao Kahn to live for millennia and survive the merging of a dozen realms. Shao Kahn's eyes, usually burning with the emerald fire of stolen souls, flared with a final, desperate burst of crimson light. He tried to speak, perhaps to utter a final curse or a command to the elder gods, but his throat was already filled with writhing, hungry biomass. Mercer leaned in, his own face a shifting mask of everyone he had ever consumed, his forehead pressed against the Emperor's skull mask. "The realms don't need a conqueror," Mercer whispered, his voice vibrating with 1,000 tones. "They need a predator that can't be bargained with." The consumption was a cataclysmic event. Usually, when Mercer absorbed a target, it was a silent, efficient process. But Shao Kahn was more than a man. He was the anchor of Outworld. As his body was pulled into the hive mind, the very walls of the United Nations began to bleed. The green soul fire that had sustained Khan's palace in Outworld flickered and died across dimensions. The sky over New York, once a bruised red, suddenly turned a terrifying, void-like black as the dimensional tethers snapped. Mercer felt the surge of power. It wasn't just energy, it was an avalanche of information. He saw the birth of the realms. He felt the weight of the Kamidogu, the mystical daggers that held the fabric of reality together. He saw the faces of the millions Shao Kahn had murdered, their genetic echoes now screaming within Mercer's own cells. The Blacklight virus was no longer just an Earthrealm pathogen. It had evolved into a realm eater. When the light faded and the dust settled in the General Assembly Hall, Shao Kahn was gone. Not even a speck of dust remained of the Conqueror. In his place stood Alex Mercer, but he was no longer the man in the leather jacket. He had grown, his frame now nearly 8 feet tall, his armor form a permanent obsidian slick layer that mimicked the ornate patterns of Khan's royal plate. From his shoulders, tattered capes of red biomass drifted like smoke. His eyes were no longer yellow. They were a deep, pulsing violet, the color of a collapsing star. He turned toward the shattered doors. Standing there, framed by the fires of a ruined Manhattan, were Raiden, Liu Kang, and Kung Lao. Behind them, the Special Forces tactical teams led by Sonya and Jack stood with weapons raised, though their hands trembled. They had come to witness the fall of a tyrant, only to find something far more unpredictable standing in the ruins.
Raiden stepped forward, his staff sparking with a hesitant dim light. The god of thunder looked at Mercer and didn't see a champion. He saw a localized Armageddon. "The Emperor is dead," Raiden said, his voice unusually quiet. "The invasion has ceased. The Outworld armies are retreating through the collapsing portals. You have saved this realm, Alex Mercer." "I didn't do it for your realm," Mercer replied, his voice of resonant, multitonal boom that caused the glass shards on the floor to dance. He looked at his hands, watching as the viral armor shifted and pulsed with the power of a dead god. "I did it because he was in my way." "You carry his strength now," Liu Kang observed, his fists clenched, though he did not strike. "We cannot let this thing remain in Earthrealm. It is an infection that will eventually crave more than just soldiers." Mercer looked at the Shaolin champion, then at the god of thunder. He could feel the spirit fire and the necro energy within him reaching a stable, terrifying equilibrium. He was the apex of two worlds, a biological bridge between magic and science. He could feel the portals closing, the connection to Outworld thinning. He could stay here and consume this world, or he could move on to the next hunt. "You're afraid," Mercer said, a small predatory smile touching his lips. "You should be, but I'm finished with New York. There's nothing left here for me to learn." He raised his hand, and instead of a blade, a shimmering rift of black and purple energy tore open in the air. He didn't need a sorcerer or a portal stone anymore. He possessed the genetic memory of the man who had mastered the merger of realms. He could walk between worlds as easily as he once walked through Central Park. "Where will you go?" Raiden demanded, stepping forward as if to block the path. Mercer looked through the rift. He saw the jagged peaks of the Order Realm, the chaotic whirlpools of the Chaos Realm, and the distant shimmering spires of Edenia. A whole multiverse of legendary warriors, unique DNA, and untapped power awaited. "To the next match," Mercer said. He stepped into the rift. As the portal collapsed behind him, the special forces lowered their weapons, and the Shaolin monks stood in a stunned, heavy silence. The invasion of Earthrealm was over, but the Mortal Kombat tournament had changed forever. The hierarchy of the realms had been shattered, replaced by a single, wandering plague that sought the ultimate evolution. Outside, the citizens of New York began to emerge from the subways in the ruins. They looked up at the sky, seeing the blue return for the first time in days. They thought they were safe. They didn't see the tiny, black and red tendrils that remained in the cracks of the asphalt where Mercer had stood. They didn't realize that while the man was gone, the infection had already taken root. Earthrealm was no longer just a realm of humans. It was a host.